And so if I want to experience the Spirit of God at work in my life, just prompting me into ministry, I've got to steward the prompting. I've got to be obedient to those promptings. And it could be something as very small as just moving closer to your wife, or something just as small as speaking an encouraging word to a friend, or something as small as giving a little extra money to mission or some endeavor in your church. Just a prompting. You've got to steward the prompting. And you have no idea, you have no idea what's on the other side of the prompting. Right? I hate to think of all the incredible things I forfeited because of not responding to the promptings of the Spirit of God. You have no idea what's on the other side of the prompting. And if you quench the Spirit, if you don't respond to the prompting, you forfeit, you miss out what's on the other side of it. I'll give you an example of this. I've got a friend named Neil who he's a prophet. He's very prophetic. And God just speaks to him about people. And Neil loves to hang out in places like Waffle House. Is that what they are? Yeah, well, very good. The Waffle House is disgusting. It's one of the only restaurants you walk into and they have those little, like, careful or you'll slip signs, but the floor's not wet. It's just there's grease caked all over the place, and so just watch your step. And I go, Neil, why do you hang out in places like that? Why do you go eat in places like that? I mean, you could lose a couple LBs. Why are you going into venues like that? And he said, have you seen the people that work there? And I said, no. He said, Jared, there's some really broken people that work in Waffle House. And I find I have amazing opportunities to minister to them. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's what I was going to say, too. I just... So one time, Neil went into one of these restaurants, and he paid at the counter and walked out. And as he was paying at the counter, the woman just had this grimace, this painful look on her face. And Neil said, are you okay? And she said, I've got massive toothaches, and it's just killing me. And he goes, have you gone to the dentist? And she said, sir, I work at Waffle House. I can't afford to go to the dentist. And Neil said, well, you know what? I'll be praying for you. And he walked out. And he said, when he walked out, he said, Jared, it's like the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, go ahead and get in your truck and see what I do to you. And so he just stopped in his tracks, turned around and walked right back into the restaurant. He didn't even live in this city. And he said, if I could get you into a dentist, would you go today? And she said, sir, I don't have any money. If I got you into a dentist and paid for it, would you go today? And she said, yes, I would. And so he said, well, give me your phone number and I'll work it out. And she said, I don't have a phone. So he took down the Waffle House phone. He went to the closest phone book he could find, payphone, and flipped through the phone book, found a dentist, called him up and said, I'd like to make an appointment for a young woman named Renee. And they said, okay, we'll make the appointment. We just need a credit card to hold the reservation. And so he gave them his credit card information, and he called Renee and gave her the information, sends Renee to the doctor, and at the dentist, Neil gets a phone call on his cell phone, and they said, sir, Mr. McClendon, we went in and looked at her teeth, and they are so bad that we're actually going to have to perform oral surgery and remove all of her teeth. And Neil said, okay, we'll go ahead. And she said, well, sir, who am I to say is going to pay for this? And he said, you tell the dentist the light of the world's going to pay for it. And lady said, I'm sorry, what? And he goes, yeah, see, Jesus said I'm the light of the world and that I'm supposed to shine his light and tell the world about him. So you just go ahead and tell the dentist the light of the world's going to pay for it. And she said, sir, we're going to need a name. And he said, well, just put it on my name. You've got my credit card information. She goes in for oral surgery. While they're in there, they discover on her some lesions on her tongue and throat. And they call up Neil and they said, sir, we went in for oral surgery and discovered she has tongue and throat cancer. We've caught it in time and think that we can actually, through surgery and radiation, she's going to be fine, but she's going to have to go in for some major treatments here. And she said, sir, the dentist also wanted me to let you know that he's the light of the world too, and he's going to take care of everything for you. Now, let me ask you this. What would have happened had Neil got back in his truck? Like, you have no idea. You have no idea what's on the other side of the prompting. No idea at all. If you're going to experience the Spirit of God in ways that Jesus experienced the Spirit of God, you're going to have to be willing to receive the prompting to ministry and then do it. Steward that prompting. Be obedient with that prompting. A few months later, Neil got a call from this perfect stranger. He said, Mr. McClendon, you don't know me, but I'm Renee's mom, and you saved her life. She's off of alcohol. She's recovering, and I just wanted to call and say thank you. Listen, you have no idea. You have no idea what's on the other side of the prompting. And God entrusts this kind of prompting, this kind of movement of His Spirit to certain kinds of men. Now, I got to be honest with you. I covet those stories. You know? In fact, I almost told you like it happened to me. No, I'm kidding. And there's been times in my life where there's been times in my life where I find myself just telling other people's stories. And there just comes a point where you get to the place you're like, I'm tired of telling other people's stories. You know? I'm tired of telling stories of how God worked in another man who was fully yielded and responsive and open, who lived in the rhythm of open, responsive. There's got to come a point where you say, that's the life I want. Again, maybe not always sensational, but significant. That I want to live in the rhythm of openness and responsiveness, but God entrusts that to a certain kind of man. And here's what I think it takes. Jesus loved her and gave Himself up for her. Jesus loved the church and gave Himself up for the church. You know who I think, as you look in Scripture, who does God entrust this kind of fullness of the Spirit of God to? Who does He entrust it to? Men who love His church. Men who love His church. I pray all the time for an increase in spiritual giftings. But what's the purpose of the gifts of the Spirit? To edify the church, to build up the church. God is not going to give me increased manifestations of the gifting of the Spirit if I don't desire the purpose for why the gifts are given. If I don't love the church, if I don't have a passion for the church, if I don't dream about that. See, most of us just complain about the church's condition instead of dreaming about its potential. If I'm not dreaming about the church's potential and saying, yes, God, I see all that you want to make the church and what you want to make me. And so I just want to be fully yielded to you for the good of your church and for the forward progress of your mission. If you don't deeply love the church, God's not going to, He's not going to steward this prompting and power and anointing to you, right? I'm a big fan of a guy named E. Stanley Jones, who's a missionary in India. I don't agree with everything he says, but there's a few things he says that really grip me. And one of the things was this. He says, only as I'm linked to God's purpose can I expect God's power. Many want power so they can become prominent and important through that power. So that power never comes. It eludes them. Man, if you want to know the power of God in greater fullness, it begins with having being linked to God's purpose. Saying, I love His purpose. I love His church. I love His mission. I love to see His name honored and exalted and treasured and cherished. I love that. And when you link to His purpose, that's when you position yourself for greater fullness of the Spirit and a greater experience of God's power at work in your life. Most of us never experience the power of God in our life because we never attempt anything that requires it. We just sort of coast. We've never really linked ourselves to a purpose that is so divine in nature that it requires divine power to pull it off. And so until there's an embrace of the purposes of God, an embrace of the mission of God, an embrace of the things that God has a passion and heart for, you never experience the power of God. It does not entrust His power to people who do not care about His purposes. Now, there are so many needs in your church right now. Ways for you to link yourself to God's purpose. Ways for you to say, God, I want to get so on board with your purpose that I have to become fully dependent upon your power to see fruitful ministry happen.